Black student helps old man with Alzheimer's. Hours later, a luxury car pulls up to his door. Imagine this. A struggling college student, juggling long hours, studying, and barely making ends meet, stops to help an elderly man with Alzheimer's on the street. It's just another act of kindness, right? But little did he know, this one moment of compassion would change his entire life. Hours later, the student is shocked when a luxury car pulls up to his door. Inside, a man steps out and introduces himself as the son of the elderly man he helped. What happens next is something the student could never have predicted. The elderly man, who turns out to be a wealthy entrepreneur, wants to reward him for his kindness in a way that would completely transform his future. This story is about more than just a random act of kindness. It's about how one simple decision can lead to unexpected opportunities. Join us as we explore how compassion and selflessness can open doors to life-changing rewards, and how it all started with a moment of human connection. Stay tuned, because this is a story that will inspire you to believe that good things happen when you do the right thing, even when no one's watching. Meet David, a hardworking Black college student trying to make a better life for himself. Every day feels like a struggle, as he balances the demanding workload of his studies with a part-time job that barely covers his living expenses. He's not from a wealthy family, and life has often felt like a series of obstacles he has to overcome just to stay afloat. Despite his circumstances, David is determined. His dream is to one day run his own business, but for now, he's just trying to get through his education and take care of his responsibilities. His days are long, spent in lecture halls and libraries, with little time for anything else. After school, he works shifts at a local cafe, serving customers with a smile, even though his mind is constantly racing, worried about his next tuition payment or how he's going to afford rent next month. David is used to working hard for everything he has. There's no luxury, no room for indulgence, just survival. But through all the hardships, he carries a deep sense of pride. His determination to succeed is fueled not just by his own ambition, but by the promise he made to his family, especially his younger sister, who looks up to him as a role model. He's no stranger to hardship, but David has always believed in helping others when he can. Whether it's offering support to a classmate struggling with homework or helping a neighbor with their groceries, David believes in paying it forward. Kindness, he believes, is the foundation of success, and it's this mindset that guides him every day. One typical afternoon, as he was heading home from class, David's path crossed with an elderly man who was clearly struggling. The man was standing by his car, looking confused and disoriented, trying to remember where he was or where he needed to go. David, without hesitation, walked over to offer his assistance. Little did he know, this simple decision would set him on a completely new trajectory. He didn't expect anything in return, but his actions that day would soon change his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. David approached the elderly man cautiously, noticing how lost and confused he seemed. The man, who appeared to be in his late 70s, was standing beside his car on the sidewalk, his hands shaking slightly as he looked around, clearly unsure of his surroundings. His eyes had a look of frustration and confusion, as if he was trying to grasp onto a memory that kept slipping away. The scene was unsettling, but David, ever compassionate, felt a pull in his heart to help. "Excuse me, sir, are you okay?" David asked gently, his voice soft but firm. The elderly man turned to face him, his eyes blinking as if trying to focus. I don't know," he replied, his voice tremulous. "I was heading somewhere, but now, I can't seem to remember. I think I'm lost." David immediately recognized the signs. This man wasn't just forgetful. He was likely dealing with Alzheimer's disease. David had seen people with the condition before, and he knew how overwhelming and isolating it could be. Rather than walking away, David decided to help. "Don't worry, I'll help you," he reassured him with a warm smile. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The elderly man nodded slowly, grateful for the help. David helped him into the passenger seat of his car, and they started driving around, trying to piece together where the man lived. As they drove, David kept the conversation light, asking the man simple questions to keep him engaged, while also trying to find out more details about where he might be headed. The man spoke in fragments, his thoughts drifting like leaves in the wind. Sometimes he mentioned his family, other times he spoke of places he remembered from his past, but it was all jumbled and disconnected. "I used to live in a big house," the man said quietly, almost to himself. "A big house on a hill. My wife, she liked it there. It was so quiet." David didn't rush him. He knew from his own experience with elderly relatives that rushing someone with Alzheimer's only made them more confused and anxious. So he listened carefully, trying to make sense of what the man was saying. His heart went out to the man, knowing how frustrating it must be to constantly forget things, not knowing what is real and what is a memory slipping away. Eventually, the elderly man mentioned a street name that seemed to ring a bell. David drove to the area, but when they arrived, the man still didn't seem to recognize the house. It was clear that he was in the later stages of Alzheimer's. He had forgotten not just specific details but the very essence of his life. Despite this, he smiled at David, the appreciation in his eyes speaking volumes. "Thank you for helping me," the man said softly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." David felt a deep sense of connection to the man, even though they had only known each other for a short while. It was one of those rare moments when two strangers connected on a human level. David wasn't just helping a man find his way home. He was offering comfort and reassurance in a time of great vulnerability. The man, even though confused, still had the memory of kindness, and that meant the world to him. As David helped the elderly man to his door, the man's son came out of the house. He had been looking for his father, concerned when he hadn't returned. When he saw David, his eyes widened in surprise. "Thank you for bringing him home," the son said, shaking David's hand. "He's been getting worse, but he still insists on going out on his own. I'm really grateful for your kindness." David smiled and nodded. "No problem at all. I'm glad I could help." But as David prepared to leave, the elderly man turned to him one last time. "You're a good young man," he said, his voice trembling. "People like you, you're rare." David felt a lump form in his throat as he watched the elderly man and his son head back inside the house. He hadn't expected anything in return. All he had wanted to do was help a stranger in need. And yet, this moment of kindness was about to ripple out into something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. As David drove home, his mind replayed the events of the day. He thought about the man's life, how much he must have accomplished in his time, how much he had to lose as Alzheimer's slowly took away his memories. And yet, despite the confusion and the pain, David had given him something that day that he could still hold on to. A moment of clarity, a moment of kindness. Little did David know that this simple act of compassion was the start of something that would transform his own life in ways he never saw coming. What began as helping an elderly man with Alzheimer's would soon open the door to an unbelievable opportunity, one that would change his future forever. David's evening was winding down when he heard a knock at the door. It was a routine night. He'd finished his homework, grabbed a quick bite to eat, and was relaxing when the unexpected visitor arrived. Curious, he opened the door, and to his surprise, he found a luxury black sedan parked in front of his apartment. The car looked out of place in his modest neighborhood, its gleaming exterior contrasting sharply with the humble surroundings. The driver's side window rolled down slowly, revealing a well-dressed man in his late 40s. The man's expression was serious, but there was a hint of respect in his demeanor. "Are you David?" the man asked, his voice calm but authoritative. David nodded, still unsure of what was going on. "I've been asked to deliver something to you," the man continued. He gestured to the car, and as David looked closer, he saw the passenger door open. Out stepped a man who looked a bit older, with sharp features and a distinguished air about him. This was not just any visitor. This man had the air of someone important. His demeanor was calm but regal, and he moved with the quiet confidence that comes with wealth and experience. Before David could even ask what was going on, the man in the luxury car introduced himself. "I'm Thomas Reynolds, the son of the man you helped earlier today." David's heart skipped a beat. The elderly man with Alzheimer's? He remembered helping him, but he couldn't imagine that the man had a son, let alone someone who looked like this kind of person. Thomas looked at David with a mix of gratitude and something else, respect. "My father told me about what happened today," he said, his voice steady. "You helped him when no one else would. You gave him more than just directions, you gave him his dignity back for a few hours." David stood there, stunned. He hadn't expected anything like this, certainly not a visit from a luxury car or someone of Thomas's stature. I just helped him get home," David said, still unsure of what was happening. "It wasn't anything special." Thomas smiled, shaking his head. "What you did was special. You don't realize it yet. But that was the kind of selflessness my father hasn't seen in years. He's been struggling with Alzheimer's for a while now. It's hard for him to trust people, and he hasn't let many folks help him. But you did. That meant more than you'll ever know." David stood in awe, trying to process the situation. He had simply seen an elderly man in distress and helped him. The idea that such a simple act would bring him to this moment felt surreal. But the surprises weren't over yet. Thomas paused for a moment, looking at David with a knowing glance before continuing. "My father wants to reward you for the kindness you showed him today. He understands that people like you are rare, and he believes in paying it forward. That's why I'm here." David blinked, unsure if he heard him right. Reward him? This had to be a mistake. He couldn't understand why someone so wealthy, a man who clearly had everything, would want to reward him for something so small. But Thomas wasn't finished. He reached into his briefcase and handed David an envelope. "This is a check for your tuition," Thomas said. "Full payment. No more debt. No more stress about tuition. And that's not all." David's eyes widened. A check for tuition? He had been struggling to make ends meet for so long. The idea that someone would just pay for his education felt like a dream. Thomas continued, "In addition to that, my father has asked me to offer you an internship at his company. You'll work directly with him, get hands-on experience, and learn from some of the top professionals in the industry. This is an opportunity for you to rise above your current circumstances." David couldn't believe it. An internship at a company owned by a billionaire, the very man he had helped earlier that day. It felt like the world had suddenly shifted beneath him. He had no idea how to react. His mind was racing, and his heart was pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a small act of kindness being recognized. It was a door opening to a whole new world. "You don't have to say yes immediately," Thomas added. "Take your time. Think about it. But my father believes in you, and we both believe you have the potential to do something incredible." David stood there for a long moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. He had always been the type to work hard for what he had, but he had never imagined that an act of kindness could lead to something this extraordinary. He had given his time and energy to help someone in need, and now, in a matter of hours, his life was completely changing. A full scholarship, a job offer, and the chance to work with someone who had the resources and knowledge to shape his future. As he stood there, looking at the check and hearing Thomas's words, David felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and humility. He had done something good, something kind, without expecting anything in return. And in return, he was being given an opportunity that would set the course for the rest of his life. In that moment, David understood something important. Kindness always comes back, sometimes in the most unexpected and life-changing ways. As the realization of what was happening settled in, David stood still for a moment, his hands still gripping the check Thomas had handed him. His mind was racing, his thoughts tumbling over one another. He had always dreamed of making something of himself, of breaking free from the weight of tuition bills and financial strain. But he never imagined that the path to that success would be opened by a single act of kindness. Thomas, seeing the disbelief on David's face, gave him a moment of quiet. "I know this is a lot to process," Thomas said softly, "but I want you to understand how important your actions were today. You didn't have to help my father. You could have easily walked away, but you didn't. And that kind of selflessness isn't something you see every day." David was still stunned, but he managed to find his voice. "But why me? I'm just a college student. I've never done anything like this before." Thomas smiled, his eyes filled with sincerity. "That's exactly why. You're a person of character. You did something for someone who couldn't give you anything in return. You didn't hesitate to help, even though you're going through your own struggles. My father and I both believe in giving people like you the opportunities they deserve." David shifted on his feet, still absorbing the weight of the situation. Felt like something out of a movie. He had helped a man with Alzheimer's without a second thought. And now, here he was, standing in front of a luxury car with an opportunity that could change everything. The full scholarship. Thomas continued, handing him a second envelope. "This is for your education. Full tuition. My father knows how hard it is to get by in school without financial support, and he wants to make sure you never have to worry about money again." David's breath caught in his throat as he opened the envelope and saw the amount written inside. It was enough to cover not just one semester, but his entire remaining time in college. This wasn't just a small scholarship, it was life-altering. He had always worked 2 jobs to keep up with tuition, had borrowed money from friends, and had skipped meals just to make ends meet. Now that burden was gone. For the first time in years, David felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He stared at the check in disbelief, but Thomas wasn't finished yet. "There's more," he said with a knowing look. "In addition to the scholarship, my father wants to offer you an internship at his company. It's a mentor position where you'll learn the ropes of business management, innovation, and leadership. You'll be working directly with him and the senior executives. This is a chance to get a foot in the door of the corporate world, and we believe you have the potential to go far." David blinked, the words sinking in slowly. An internship? At a company run by a billionaire? This was something he never thought was possible. How could he, just a college student struggling to keep up, end up working alongside high-level professionals, learning from the very people he had once only read about in textbooks? Thomas must have seen the shock on his face because he leaned forward, his voice serious but encouraging. "My father built his empire from the ground up, and he knows that the right opportunity can change a person's life. We see that in you. You've got the drive and the values we look for, and we want to give you the chance to apply those qualities in the real world." David felt a knot form in his stomach. This was so much more than he had ever expected, and he had no idea if he was ready for all of this. But at the same time, he could feel something inside of him stir. A sense of excitement, of purpose, and even fear. Could he really step up to the challenge? Before David could respond, Thomas smiled gently, sensing his hesitation. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "Take some time. Think it through. We're here for you whenever you're ready to accept the offer." David nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. But he knew deep down that this was the kind of opportunity he had spent his entire life waiting for. His hands trembled slightly as he held the check and the internship offer in his hands. It was like a dream had become real. The moment of gratitude. As Thomas turned to leave, he paused for a moment and looked back at David. "One last thing," Thomas said. "My father wanted me to tell you personally, you didn't just help an old man today. You've helped a person who needed you more than you know. And for that, we're forever grateful." David felt his throat tighten, the words sinking in deeply. He hadn't done anything extraordinary. He had just seen someone in need and offered help. But in that moment, it felt like the entire world had shifted. "Thank you," David whispered, his voice barely audible. As the luxury car drove off, David stood there for a long moment, staring at the offer in his hand. He couldn't believe it. He had just been given the chance of a lifetime, all because he had chosen to stop and help someone when no one else would. Kindness had opened doors for him that had once seemed impossible to reach. As he looked at the luxury car fading into the distance, David made a promise to himself. He would take this opportunity, work hard, and prove that good things really do happen when you choose to do the right thing. David's world had turned upside down in the span of just a few days. What started as a typical college day filled with stress and struggle had now become a life-altering opportunity. The scholarship, the internship, the chance to work under a successful billionaire. The magnitude of it all weighed heavily on him. But David knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change, and it wasn't just about the financial relief. It was about the future he could now build for himself and for his family. That evening, after the luxury car had driven away, David sat down with his younger sister, Maya, at the kitchen table. She was doing her homework, her brows furrowed in concentration. David watched her for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened that day pressing on his shoulders. It was hard to believe, but it was all real. The first thing he wanted to do was share the news with his family, especially Maya, who had always looked up to him. He sat across from her, his heart racing. "Maya, I've got some big news," he said, his voice shaky with excitement. Maya looked up, her eyes wide. "What is it, David?" she asked, sensing the change in his tone. David took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. "I got a full scholarship for school. No more debt. And I also got an internship with a billionaire's company. I'm going to work under him, and he's going to mentor me." Maya's jaw dropped, her eyes filling with disbelief. "Wait, are you serious? Like, a real internship?" David nodded, the smile on his face widening. "Yeah, and the scholarship is full tuition. Everything's covered." He paused for a moment, the reality of it sinking in as he looked at his sister. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about us. About our future." Maya jumped up from her seat, her excitement mirroring David's. She rushed over to him, giving him a tight hug. "David, this is amazing. I knew you could do it." Her voice cracked with emotion. "You've been working so hard, and now it's paying off." David felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. He had always worked hard for himself, but now it wasn't just about him anymore. He was doing this for Maya, for his family, and for the future they all deserved. Over the next few weeks, David threw himself into his new life with a determination that was unstoppable. He spent his days between classes and long hours at the office, learning from the best in the industry. The internship was intense, but David thrived under the mentorship of Thomas Reynolds, who saw potential in him every step of the way. Thomas pushed him, challenged him, and offered him opportunities to take on projects that would normally be reserved for people with much more experience. David didn't back down. He rose to the occasion every time, eager to prove that he belonged there. But it wasn't just the work that changed him, it was the sense of possibility. David had spent so much of his life feeling like he was stuck in a never-ending cycle of struggle. But now, doors were opening everywhere. He started building connections with influential people in the business world, and he began to realize that his dream of starting his own company was within reach. He no longer felt limited by his background, his race, or his financial struggles. He was building something bigger than himself. As he worked late into the night, David often thought back to the elderly man with Alzheimer's, the man who had unknowingly started this whole chain of events. Helping that man hadn't been a calculated move, it had been a moment of pure empathy. And now, as David sat at his desk, he thought about the lesson that moment had taught him. Sometimes the smallest actions lead to the biggest changes. As the months passed, David's life became more stable. He started saving money, paying off the small debts that had piled up during his years of struggle. He made plans for the future, plans that no longer seemed like distant dreams, but achievable goals. He began to dream bigger, envisioning a life where he could not only provide for his family, but create opportunities for others who had faced the same struggles he had. Maya, too, started to feel the ripple effects of David's success. Her school life improved as she watched her brother's determination and success unfold before her eyes. She began to feel a renewed sense of hope for herself. "If David can do this, so can I," she often told herself. David had shown her that no dream was too big, no challenge insurmountable. One afternoon, as David was finishing up a long meeting at the office, he received a call from his mom. "David, you won't believe this, but your sister has been offered a scholarship to a top school. They want her in their advanced program." David's heart swelled with pride as he listened to his mother's excited voice. "She's got a bright future ahead of her, David. You've done more than just provide for us. You've given us hope, a chance at something better." His mom's words hit him harder than he expected. This was more than just a financial opportunity. This was the beginning of a legacy, a chance to rewrite the story of his family's future. David's success wasn't just about his career. It was about giving his family a chance at a better life, a chance they had never imagined possible. As he looked out of the office window, David thought about how far he had come. From the struggling student barely making ends meet to a young entrepreneur with the world at his feet. His journey had been anything but ordinary. But in that moment, he understood that success wasn't just about what he could accomplish on his own. It was about lifting others up along the way. David knew that this was just the beginning. With every step forward, he was not only changing his own future but shaping the future of everyone he cared about. And that, he realized, was the greatest reward of all. David's story is a powerful reminder of just how much can change with one simple, kind act. One decision to help someone in need led to life-changing rewards. It's proof that kindness, integrity, and a willingness to step up can open doors to opportunities that we might not even see coming. And while David's life was transformed by his choice, it's also a call to all of us. Small actions have power. Have you ever helped someone and ended up with unexpected rewards? Or maybe you've been the recipient of kindness that changed your life. We want to hear your stories. Drop a comment below sharing your experiences of how a simple act of kindness led to something bigger. Whether it's something small or something that turned your life around, your story could inspire someone else to take action and change their own life. If David's story moved you, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might need a reminder that good things happen when you do the right thing. It's easy to feel like the world is overwhelming at times, but stories like this show us that change starts with us. One act of kindness at a time. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of inspiration and transformation. We're dedicated to sharing stories that not only entertain but inspire real change. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on the next video that could help change your perspective, spark your next big idea, or give you the motivation to act with compassion in your own life. Take action today. Who can you help? And how can you make someone's life a little better? You never know how much your kindness can truly make a difference. Let's spread the message of hope, kindness, and opportunity. Together, we can create a world where one small action can change everything.